Thank you for being here. What's your name?
My name is Charlie Neal.
And which war were you involved in?
The Korean War,
When was it fought?
1950 to 1954.
Which branch were you in?
I was in the United States Air Force.
Did you, what kind of training did you go through?
Went to radar operator training in Greenville, South Carolina.
Now, were you always interested in planes, or?
I was always interested in planes. Yes, I loved the Air Force even when I was a kid. So yeah, that's why I decided to join the Air National Guard.
Was there like a choice between that or like the Navy, or was it always just?
Yeah, in the beginning, when the war started in 1950, they were drafting men into the service, and the draft was going to be into the Army. Well, I didn't want to be in the Army. I wanted to be in the Air Force, so I decided to join what we call the Air National Guard. And from the Air National Guard, I was called on active duty into the United States Air Force.
Where did you serve?
I went to boot camp in Greenville, South Carolina at Donaldson Air Force Base. And from Donaldson Air Force Base, I went to Camp Stoneman in Pittsburgh, California. And from Pittsburgh, California, I went to Yokohama, Japan on a troop ship.
So what did you do before you joined the Air Force?
I had just graduated from high school in February of 1950, and I started to work for a security company called ADT Security. And from February 1950 until about July of 1950, I worked for the company, and then I went on active duty with the Air National Guard.
How high of a ranking did you get throughout your?
I was an airman second class, what they call an airman second class in the Air Force, which is equivalent to a sergeant.
What did that let you control, like, under the Air Force?
Well, I was a radar operator, and I watched the screen, like a TV screen, and you watch the planes when they were coming in, and it was a warning system to warn the air base, that enemy planes were coming in. That's what my training was.
Were you guys ever like under like your base where you were? Was it ever like threatened or like under attack?
No, I got to Korea. I went to Korea from Yokohama, Japan, and I got there after the main fighting and the main war part of it was up in the northern part of North Korea. And so I wasn't involved in any combat.
And where did you live, like in Japan?
I lived at the Air Force Base at Kempo Airfield in Korea for 3 months. And then I went from Kempo Airfield to Tachikawa Air Force Base in Japan, where I was assigned to the 6400th Communications Squadron, which they didn't need radar operators there, so I became a telephone repairman.
How were for the 3 months that you were in there, based at the camp or whatever, how were the sleeping arrangements? Yeah, like living conditions.
They were in tents. We lived in tents around the base.
Did you have like roommates and stuff?
The tents had about 15 guys in it.
What did you guys eat?
K-rations, what they call K-rations. You ever heard of K-rations?
No.
They're packaged food. Well, I don't even know how to explain it, but They were called K rations. And we drank water, and we made our own coffee. And if you wanted coffee, you had to make your own coffee.
And how did you stay in touch with your friends and family back home?
You had no communication between the war zone and the United States back in those days. There was no telephone communication, no. The only communication that you had was to write letters back home. Mm-hmm. That was it. And sometimes it took a month and a half or more for the letter to get back to the United States, and for letters to get to you too, because they had what they call censorship. And they would look at the letters that you got, and they would look at the letters that you sent. And if you said anything wrong about where you were or what you did or anything like that, they would blank it out. You weren't allowed to talk about anything about where you were.
Now, did you know any friends or family going into the war, or did you just make friends when you got there?
I had about 9 of my buddies all joined the Air National Guard at the same time. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and we graduated from a high school called Miami Technical High School. And we all joined the Air National Guard at the same time, and 9 of my best friends.
Did any of those friends die while you were in the war?
No, fortunately, they didn't. 4 of them went to Europe, to Germany, and the remainder went to Japan and Korea.
Do you have any favorite stories or favorite memories with those friends there?
I have a favorite memory of boot camp. We were a bunch of Florida boys, and it was in December of 1951, and it snowed real heavily. And we had never seen snow, so we were out in the snow in our underwear, just throwing snowballs at each other and just having a ball out there. And that's one of my favorite memories of the boot camp. And then when I got overseas, it was kind of an adult time over there. Kind of you worried a lot about whether you were going to be in a war. I worried a lot about that myself, and we all did. We all worried about whether we were going to be involved in whether or be anywhere near the war, and so that was a worry we had.
And as a radar operator, what kind of planes did you look for?
They had what you call a MiG-15, which is a Russian plane that the Korean Air Force had. And I forget the transport planes and the bombers. I never knew what the numbers were on those. But we saw a lot of what we call MiG-15 Russian planes that the Koreans operated. And that's what we saw on the radar.
And what was like the biggest plane or the scariest plane that you ever saw or would look for?
It was a Russian, it was Illusion or something like that, bomber that I saw fly over. And we saw the MiGs every once in a while fly over.
And those were all Russian planes?
They were all Russian planes, yeah.
And how about Chinese planes? Were they like not as good?
Chinese didn't, I don't remember any Chinese planes. I'm sure there were, but I didn't see any. I'm sure they were all gone back after I got there.
Could you explain your radar system and how it worked?
It was what you called a Tipsy 1B, and it was the earlier radar, and it was you see them sometimes now around airfields. But it was a type radar, and it would go up and down like that. And the main problem with that type of radar back in those days was you could not see low-lying planes coming in. Okay, go ahead.
What was the biggest plane that, the most useful plane that we had in the war?
It was called a Saberjet. And that's what our pilots used to engage the MiG-15, the Russian planes. And that was our main plane during the Korean War. That was our fighter plane.
Did you ever get to go inside of it?
I was in one. When I got back to Japan from Korea, we went to Suiki Air Force Base, which was where all the pilots flew out of on their missions in the Korean War. And that's where all your heroes were, and all your guys that really hotshot pilots were at Suiki Air Force Base. And I got to know one of them back in Miami. When I got back to Miami, his name was Major Jabera. And he was a real war hero. And then there was Colonel O'Connell, who was also an ace during the Korean War. But I did get to meet them at Suiki Air Force Base, and I did get to sit in a Sabre jet, and which was a neat plane. And I always wanted to be a pilot myself, but I never was able to qualify for it.
Why weren't you able to qualify? Like, why weren't you able to qualify? Like,
well, you gotta have some kind of college. Back in those days, you had to have some kind of college training, and you had to have. You had to be in a regular service, and you had to be called on active duty in a regular service, which I wasn't. I was, at the time, I was in the Air National Guard. And you weren't able to train for any of that. We were lucky to just be radar operators.
How long a day did you work?
Sometimes as many as 10 hours a day.
Do you have any good stories about your radar system and how you couldn't see the planes that were coming in on the ground?
Oh yeah, you could not see planes coming in at the low level of flight. Back in those days, the radar just wasn't good enough to detect. And that's why we were able to see some of those planes come flying over us, because we didn't see them on radar at all.
Now, what was considered a low level?
Back in those days, I think they were about 500, 600 foot or something like that, maybe 1,000 feet.
were there like main airplanes that they used for bombing and others for like fighting, or are they all used for the same thing?
We had, our bombers were B-29, what you call a B-29, Flying Fortress. And that was our main bomber plane. And we had, I think we had a A-20, which was a intermediate bomber type plane, and a night flying plane. And we had a B-26. That was another bomber, intermediate type bomber. B-29 was a big bomber type, and they used that to bomb North Korea and all the way up to the Yellow River, I guess.
Did you ever have any nicknames for you or your friends? Any like funny nicknames?
No, but everybody called me Rusty because my name was Nail, and they called me Rusty Nail. And so that was the name that I got. We had all kinds of names for each other, but they're not much publishable.
Were you friends with like the higher ranked people? Like, were the higher ranked people friends with like the lower?
Not until I got back to Japan. When I got to Japan, we went to a lot of events with the higher ranked people, but not in Korea.
What did you do in your free time?
You didn't have much free time. There was nothing to do, to tell you the truth. There's absolutely nothing to do. You just listen. Some of the guys would have radios, electric radios, which they use a generator. But I didn't have a radio or anything like that. So we did get the news a lot. They would broadcast the news. Air Force had a radio station that they broadcast, and we did get that. And
Were there were the camps set in middle of nowhere, or are they set near towns?
well, Keppel Airfield was a major. Seoul, Korea was the capital of Korea. So Keppel Field was right outside of Seoul. That was a major city in Korea. But we weren't allowed off base at all. We weren't allowed into town or anything like that.
What did you think about the war? Did you have any political views about it?
Not at the time. I didn't. I thought that the Koreans were a bunch of jerks for invading South Korea, but that was just a personal opinion. But I didn't have any political opinion at the time. Later on, I started getting political whenever Harry Truman fired General MacArthur. He was our commander-in-chief. And General MacArthur was fired because he wanted to go across the Yalu and into China. And the government, the United States government, didn't want to do that. So he was fired and brought back to the United States.
So you don't think that Truman should have pulled him?
Well, I think he was a good president. I think he was a good president. At the time, I had no opinion of what I thought about it. Over the years, there's been some doubt in my mind whether that was the right thing to do. But he was the president, and I was all for him. So,
Did your views about him change from before the war to after? Did your views about President Truman, did you think differently about him after the war than before
I
the war?
was just out of high school. I didn't think anything about politics or whatever. I was just out of high school. I'm just a young kid, and I was scared to death to be over there, and so I didn't think too much about politics. I'll guarantee you that.
What did you think that it would be like over there, being in the Air Force?
Well, I didn't think it would be as bad for Air Force personnel as it was for the Army and the Marines. The Army and the Marines lost, I think there's over 50,000 people lost in the Korean War. And if you compare that to the war now, we're talking about 4,000 deaths as compared to 50,000 in the Korean War. And there might have been more than that. I'm not sure about how many, but I know there was at least 50,000 men killed in the Korean War. And it was called a police action at the time, and not a war. And I did have a lot of feelings about that afterwards. A lot of service people really felt really bad that they called it a police action instead of a war, because it was a war. It was just as much of a war as Iraq and Afghanistan is right now.
Do you think the U.S. should have been involved in the Korean War?
Absolutely. I think we went there to defend the South Koreans, and because North Korea invaded South Korea, that's why we were there.
Do you think the people back home were supportive of what was going on?
I think so, yes. During the Korean War, I think the public was supportive. When I came back home, I know we had a big welcoming committee of people to welcome service people back when I got back, and I know no matter where I went, you were like king to people back in those days if you were in the service. I mean, they really appreciated a serviceman back in those days.
Did it ever get to a point where they needed to start drafting?
They did draft during the beginning of the Korean War, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to go into the Air Force, because I did not want to be in the Army. I was 18 years old, and I was scared to death, And I didn't want to be in, in a shooting war. So I volunteered for the Air Force.
What was the youngest that you could be to be in, like, in the Air Force?
I think 17 years, or 16 or 17 years of age, I believe it was. But I was 19 years old when I went overseas.
Did you ever work with any 16-year-olds?
No, I didn't.
Any questions?
So you and all your friends were not drafted, and you all joined the Air Force because you didn't.
Yeah, we joined what they called the Air National Guard at
Right.
the time. And then we were called on active duty into the United States Air Force.
Right. And all of your friends returned home with you, and I'm assuming everyone respected them as well when they got home. They had big
Oh yeah,
parties.
all my friends made it back home pretty good, yeah. Four of them were in Europe, in Germany, and the rest of us were scattered around the Pacific, Japan, Korea, Iwo Jima, different places like that. So we were scattered all over. We were really called on active duty to be like support for the other services. That's what we were there for.
Are you still friends with them today?
I haven't seen any of my buddies, and my best friend that I joined with passed away 2 years ago. He had cancer, and but most of us, we just scattered all over the place. I had two friends that I met over in Kawa. One was a truck driver in civilian life, and the other one was I forget what he was a farmer, I think. Those were two good friends of mine, but I lost contact with them over. We used to meet in Orlando every once in a while for years. We lost contact with each other, and I haven't seen them or heard from them in years.
Did you meet any other civilians?
Did I meet any other civilians? Well, I worked with the Japanese civilians while I was over there, and when I went to Japan, I was telephone communications, and we had the Japanese that worked right alongside of us in communications and telephone repair. And I got to know quite a few of them. I got to be pretty good friends with them, and I learned to speak Japanese pretty fluently while I was there. But I don't remember too much of it nowadays.
Did you keep in touch with any of them?
No, I didn't.
How was life when you got back home? Did it change at all?
I went right back to work for the company that I was working for. Fortunately, which I'm not sure it happens nowadays, but when you went in the service, most companies held your job for you, and when you got back, you had a job. And we did not have to worry about a job when I got back out of the service. I went right back to work. And I tell you, I was never so glad in all my life to get back home. I was really homesick, to tell you the truth, whenever I got back. But I got married right after that, too, when I got back. Within about 6 months, I got married to my childhood sweetheart.
What were you ranked when you were in Korea?
I'm in second class.
Did you take any pictures while you were up there?
Yes, I had pictures for years, but I have no idea whatever happened to them. I've moved around so many places that I just don't know what happened. I've got some of the pictures up at Greenville, South Carolina. Some of the pictures where we went up into the mountains and for R&R and stuff like that. But other than that,
Is that when they had black and white photography, or did they have color?
No, black and white.
At the base camp where you were staying, what was it like around it? Was there a lot of trees, or was it desert area?
Which one, in Japan or Korea?
Both.
Korea was kind of a barren place. It was a city, it was, the city itself had trees and stuff like that, but the base was kind of a barren place. Japan was a beautiful place. A lot of beautiful trees and forests, and the Japanese were really nice to us. They were really very good to us, and really enjoyed it there.
Did you guys ever have to like fight during like really hard storms?
Oh, we did have a real bad typhoon that we went through coming from Camp Stoneman, California, to Yokohama, Japan. We ran into a typhoon, and with the ships had to all kind of bypass and try to get around the typhoons, and there was, I bet you 50% of the guys on that ship were seasick. They were they were in bad shape, and I could not sleep down in the bunk. The bunks were in the lower deck, and there were canvas bunks, and they were about this wide, and they were 4 high. And if a guy got sick above you, it wasn't any fun. So it happened to me one night, and from then on, my buddy of mine, talked me into going up and sleeping on the top deck. We slept out during the night in the open air during the night on the ship, because it was really bad down in that ship.
Did you guys get rained on when you slept on deck?
By then, most of the storm was gone. You know, we didn't go up there during the storm or anything. Even the sailors weren't up on top of the deck there during the storm. They just, only the minimum people were up there that really had to be up there. So, it was kind of scary because that ship was going like this, and I mean, it was really rolling bad, and the waves were sometimes as much as 10 or 12 foot high, and you can see the waves coming up like that around this ship, and it was really scary. We're going overseas.
How long did you spend on the ship?
21 days we were on the ship, going from United States to Yokohama, Japan.
About how many people do you think were on that ship?
There's 5,000 Marines and 700 Air Force people, and some Army. Most of them were Marines on the ship with us. They were going directly to Korea.
Did you spend a lot of time with like other forces during the war?
No, I didn't.
You mainly stuck with like the Air Force?
No, strictly with the Air Force. There was Marines on the base. You got to know the Marines on the base and people like that. But other than that, that was the only service people that I really met while I was there. I never met any Army personnel at all. Most of them were Marines around the base.
So you never saw any like action or gunfire, but what was the worst thing that you encountered?
The worst thing that I encountered was seeing the body bags on an Air Force plane when I flew from Korea to Tachikawa Air Force Base when I was transferred. The body bags that were on the plane and the wounded soldiers that were on the plane going to Tachikawa, because Tachikawa was a base hospital in Japan, and that's where they flew a lot of the wounded personnel to Tachikawa Air Force Base. And they were right there at the base hospital, but there was quite a few of them there, wounded veterans, yeah.
Did they use like were they like telegrams or messages to like tell the families that they were dead?
Well, yeah, I'm sure they did. They would notify back, and they would talk back in the States and notify them back in the States, and then the personnel wherever would go and notify the family.
As far as medical technology goes, what was the most advanced thing that they had over there? Like,
They didn't have any MRI machines or anything like that. They had basic medical supplies, but there was a lot of doctors that volunteered to serve during the Korean War. There were doctors at this base hospital, which I think was very commendable. We had a lot of doctors that just gave up their practice in the United States and became doctors in the service, and I thought that was very commendable.
What kind of injury during the war could send you home? Like, was there like certain injuries that could send you home from the war?
Oh, I'm sure there was, but I'm not sure what they would have been. I know that people that lost legs and arms and stuff like that automatically did go back to the States. Not that part I do know.
Do you know if anybody like purposefully hurt themselves so that they could go home?
Well, I've heard of them, people pretending that they're mentally ill. I've heard of stories like that, but I never actually saw anybody like that. But you hear stories like that all the time in the service, where people they'll do anything to get out of service, so they pretend they're mentally ill.
what do you think was the most common injury?
The most common injury was gunshot wounds, and then the hand grenade wounds. That was the most common, from what I heard about the Korean War.
Were the gunshot wounds like more hurtful than the grenade wounds, or the other way around?
Well, not really, because the grenades would blow arms and fingers off and legs and stuff like that, and get like shrapnel. Now, a good friend of mine that was interviewed by your group of people still has shrapnel in his body from the Second World War, from hand grenades and stuff like that. They never removed. In fact, one little piece of the shrapnel, what they call shrapnel, which is the steel from the grenades that they used, and is still embedded in his body. And one piece just came out recently, just came out from underneath the skin. You know, you're talking about, that was the Second World War he was in. And you're talking about 1941, 42, and here it is 2009. Do the math. I had a lot of good friends in the Second World War, and I had an aunt, not an aunt, I had two uncles in the Second World War. One was in Okinawa, and another one was in the Philippines. And he wound up in what you call the Bataan Death March, and where the Japanese marched them some of them all the way up to Manchuria. And the ones that survived, well, there wasn't many of them that survived what they call the Death March, and that was the invasion of the Philippines by the Japanese.
Did anybody think that the war would become the Third World War?
No, not at that time we didn't. Years later we thought about if we had went above the Yalu River and into China, that might have caused the beginning of the Third World War. But, you never know. History turned out the way it did, but we'll never know because, but I think that's what Harry Truman had in mind whenever he fired General MacArthur, thinking that was not a very good idea. And he was a commanding officer over the service, and Harry Truman was a very good president at the time. Yeah.
How long was the war expected to last? Just a couple years or a little longer?
Well, I'm not sure. Probably not long. They expected to go in, and of course Korea is not a large landscape, and they were able to reinforce and go back into Korea after they were pushed all the way down to the southern tip of the peninsula, which is Busan. That's how far the Koreans and the Chinese advanced. And we were almost pushed out of Korea during the Korean War. So it took time to march back up, city by city, town by town, taking it back, and going back up to they wound up at the 38th parallel, which is a town called Pyongyang, Korea. And that's where the war ended. That's where the armistice was signed.
How far in advance did you know that you were going to go home?
I knew about 3 months before they sent me back home that I was going to go. Because again, we were just support personnel that was sent over there, just like there's a lot of support personnel now that goes over to Iraq and Afghanistan that have nothing to do with the war. And so my tour of duty was 2 years, and I wound up in the service 2 years and 1 month.
Did you stay to the end of the war?
No, I didn't. I came home before the end of the war.
In the current war, they're using almost like remote controls to control the planes. Did you ever think that would be possible in the Korean War?
No, I did not. No, I did. I tell you, I never thought about handheld telephones, and we had walkie-talkies, but I never thought about a handheld telephone or any of the modern things you kids have. It's just amazing what you have nowadays. If we had had that in the Korean War, it probably would have got over with a lot quicker. If we'd had the stuff that you got nowadays. I think that's why the injuries and the deaths in the war now are so much less because of the modern technology we have.
If there was one thing from the war that's going on now, if there's one piece of technology that you could have had in the Korean War, what would it have been?
Probably cell phones. That would have probably been because then you could talk back home like the servicemen can do now. They could call home, and that would have really been nice to have.
Did everyone in at the camps have pictures of their families and stuff?
Yes, they did. Yeah. I had a picture of my brother, who was a Marine, and of course my mother, and one of my uncles.
Did you ever get to see your brother?
My brother wound up in Guantanamo Bay. That's where he served his whole time. He was in Puerto Rico for a little while, but he was in Guantanamo Bay. He was a Marine there. He never went overseas at all during the Korean War.
Do you think the photos of their families provided inspiration for a lot of the people in the war?
And again,
Do you think the photos of their families provided inspiration for a lot of the people that were serving in the war?
oh, I'm sure it did. Yeah, absolutely. Because you get homesick so easy, and looking into pictures, getting mail about every 3 months or so. That mail was really very important, and that really kept you going.
Were there specific uniforms you guys had to wear?
We wore what we call khaki outfit. Is what we wore then.
Did you have medal placements for the rank that you were?
Yes, I had stripes on my shoulder, and I won the Korean Service Award and the United Nations Service Award. Those are the two medals that I have.
What did you miss the most from home?
Work. I really enjoyed my job, and I was really excited to be a young kid out of high school, and I really enjoyed my job. And I tell you, I worked for the same company for 41 years.
Did you ever plan on going to college?
No, we couldn't afford college back in those days. My mother my mother and father were divorced, and we just barely were able to live. We didn't think about going to college back in those days.
So were you planning on joining the Air Force like when you were little, or did it just like as the war came up, did you?
No, I had no idea that's what I was going to wind up doing.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to the end of your story?
Well, let me just go over my notes here. Yes, we made several trips to Tokyo, Japan, and to pick up directories service for the service personnel on the base. And I was able to spend a weekend in Tokyo, Japan. I went to a Japanese steakhouse, and we went to what they call the Ernie Pyle Theater, which is a very famous place that was built after the Second World War when the Japan surrendered. Ernie Pyle was a war correspondent that was right in the middle of all the fighting in the Pacific and everything, and he wrote stories about the service personnel and sent it back home, and a lot of servicemen got to know him really well, and he was a great man. But to see that theater and see the history there, I really loved that. And we went to a steakhouse in Japan, and we had what you call Kobe beef over there, which is no fat in their beef. And that was great. We didn't get any steaks on the base in the Air Force, so that was really great. But and went to what you call Mount Mataki in Japan, which is a cable car that takes you up to the top of the mountain, and up to the top of the mountain there was a Japanese tea house, and they served you tea up there, and just a wonderful experience to go up to some place like that. And that's about it.
Who was the first person to greet you when you got home?
Back to Miami,
Yes.
my girlfriend and my mother.
And what was the first thing you did when you got home?
First thing I did when I got home was sleep for 24 hours. I was so tired when I got, because back in those days, plane flew from California to Chicago, from Chicago to I forget where else. Actually, it took 2 days to get home flying back in those days because you flew on what you call non-scheduled airlines. Believe that.
Okay, thank you for letting us interview you.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
It was very interesting.